episode of Progress, Potential, and Possibilities, discussions with fascinating people designing a better tomorrow for all of us. I'm your host, Ira Pastor.
Welcome everybody again to another episode of our show with another really fascinating guest, helping to create a better tomorrow on many different fronts. As a little background to this show, we're going to start off like we usually do with some data. It is currently estimated that around 40% of all produce is wasted due to spoilage that occurs somewhere before it reaches the consumer's grocery bag. And this loss, when you put aside sort of the loss due to quality and ripeness standards and so forth that consumers want or don't want, also takes into account sort of the global emissions, the fresh water supply that went into producing those crops and so forth, the energy to transport them, represents about $1 trillion annually, which is a shocking number. Today we have the honor of being joined by Katherine Sizov, who is the founder of a company here in Philadelphia called Strella Biotechnology. And they are involved in building novel biosensing platforms that can predict the ripeness of fruits and ultimately use this information to optimize supply chain, reduce food waste, and increase produce margins. Her company, Strella, won the 2019 President Innovation Award at University of Pennsylvania back in 2019, the grand prize of the Arizona State University Innovation Open, the Venture Award at the O3 World 1682 Conference, and most recently, excitingly, is coming off a $3.3 million seed round with some really prominent institutional investors, including Marc Cuban, Yamaha Motor Ventures, and lab in Silicon Valley, Catapult Ventures. Katherine studied at the University of Pennsylvania in molecular biology and chemistry and engineering entrepreneurship. When she's not doing that, she's also a very accomplished fencer. Welcome, Katherine Sizov, to our show.
Thank you so much. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, this is outstanding. I'm really excited that you're here, and I'd like to start off like we typically do by handing you the floor for a few minutes just to really talk about yourself. If you could take some time to talk about where you grew up, how you got interested in STEM, and then I was reading a bit about what you did before this, and you were involved in in down at the NIH doing CRISPR and gene editing fibroblasts. Ultimately, how you got involved in agri-biotech from that, I think that'd be a neat little part of this story.
Totally. Yeah. So when I was a young kid, I kind of grew up around the Boston area. And I think my first experience with bio specifically, not STEM, in general, was that we kind of lived right next to Harvard University. And they used to throw away all of or donate their old equipment to just anyone who would come by. I think it was like on Thursday or something. And so my dad used to kind of pilfer computers and hardware and things like that from this kind of like garage sale that Harvard University used to do. And when I was a little kid, he would put me in a dumpster, basically, because that way I wouldn't run away. And inside this dumpster was a ton of biotech equipment. And so that kind of became my playground as a kid. While he was trying to find like computer things, he would put me there. And so I kind of grew up playing with like unused pipette tips or conical flasks and things like that, and like old PCR machines. And I think what was really interesting to me is that my dad had no idea what any of this was. So it's kind of like an alien world to him. He's an engineer, and he's very much like on the electronics, kind of mechanical engineering side of things. And so when I started asking about these biological things, he had no idea. And that, for a kid, kind of makes your imagination go wild. And so from a young age, I kind of had an interest in biology. I took that, started my first real experience with biotech was at the NIH. I kind of begged my way into an internship there. And I was super fortunate to be working in a lab with people who were really supportive of learning. We're very patient with a 16-year-old kid kind of wreaking havoc in their lab and messing up experiments. So I had some extremely kind and patient mentors that taught me a lot of the basics. So by the time I graduated high school, I had at least some tools that I could start playing around with. I took that into college, started learning a little bit more, getting a little bit deeper in the field of genetics and neuroscience, continuing work and studies. And then at some point, somewhere close to my junior year of college, the moment came when I realized I had to decide whether or not to go to grad school. And something about that wasn't quite sitting right with me. A 9-year neuroscience PhD was something that I felt like I couldn't find a project that I was willing to commit myself to. So in order to try to find a project that I thought would be interesting enough to do a 9-year PhD in, I started reading things. As a procrastinator, I didn't read that much about neuro and started just reading completely unrelated things. And I stumbled upon that stat that you brought up at the beginning of the show, which is that 40% of all food is wasted before it's consumed. And when I read that, it was kind of a slap in the face. And I got very interested in why that's happening. It just seems like an astronomical number, especially in modern day society. And so at that point, first it was just reading about things. It slowly turned into, I'm going to skip class to go talk to some growers out in Lancaster, Pennsylvania, to learn about where my food even comes from, which was another startling realization that I had no idea. And then eventually kind of formulated the idea for Strella.
Really cool background. Katherine, take us a little bit into ethylene. Ethylene, we're all familiar with it. It's sort of indirectly because we have, in our house, we have plenty of bananas and apples and guacamole that, one day is nice, red and yellow and green, but then turns brown and we got to throw it out. And we have this, master sort of regulator chemical that all these fruits like to say, hey, starting to ripen here, but we don't always see the brown stuff. It starts a little earlier than that. Talk a little bit about ethylene, and we'll get into the technologies in a little bit, but take us through sort of the biology of ripening, if you would.
Totally. So basically, fruits communicate with each other as they ripen. There's some sort of evolutionary advantage to all of the fruit on a tree ripening at the same time. We're not entirely sure why that is yet, but it is a fact. And so the way that fruits do this is they emit gases as they ripen to communicate with one another. And these gases also foster the continued maturation of the fruit itself. So it's kind of like a cyclical process. And one of the key gases that is used in this is ethylene gas. So like you said, we all have a very colloquial relationship with ethylene. When you put an unripe banana next to a ripe one, you see that it ripens a lot faster than if it was by itself. And this is because that ripe banana is emitting ethylene at the unripe banana and telling it to start maturing. It also is the reason why we hear that saying or phrase, one bad apple spoils the bunch. And that's very true. And that's what makes that's what causes a lot of challenges in our supply chain. So actually in the field where I work in, we work with people who store apples, and apples are stored in groups of 5 million at a time. So 5 million apples in a single room. And our customer has to make a decision about which room has the ripest fruit. But if you've got one bad apple that's emitting that ethylene in that room, it can cause a whole cascade of other fruit to start maturing, even if 99% of your room was really great fruit to begin with.
Yeah, I was reading an interview you did when you were talking about sort of this cold storage situation and how long, as you're saying, things like apples sit there. You also mentioned in that interview something about some of these storage rooms have no oxygen in them. If you walk in, you drop dead if you stay in there too long. Enter your technologies, obviously. Well, there's a couple of components of it, and you can walk us through this. There's obviously the biosensing component of this, where, hey, we got to find out which one of these batches, these 5 million apples, are going to go faster than the others. But also, the second part of this, a topic that we talk a lot about on the show, this Internet of Things, that we can't be in that warehouse, we can't be in that storeroom all the time. We need to do things remotely. You've brought these two areas together really elegantly with Strella. Walk us through a little bit about what you're up to with these sensors and the Internet of Things component, if you would.
Totally. So Basically, we have this very complicated food supply chain that has a ton of different players, a lot of different interests, crops that are grown in very variable environments. And so it generates a lot of spoilage, and there's a lot of issues that kind of come hand in hand with a complex supply chain. So our thought is that maybe if we add a little bit of data to the food supply chain, not just us, but anybody with any kind of technology and any solution, then we can kind of combine all of these approaches and work on reducing food waste, which is that huge, huge problem that everyone, I think, understands is something that needs to be addressed. Mm-hmm. So we think that by feeding food supply chain with data, we can make it a lot smarter. And we're focusing primarily on predicting the ripeness of fruit. And we do that with measuring ethylene. But it's not just a sensor. Like you said, we kind of couple a few things together. So we've got a sensor that detects these gases that fruits emit as they ripen. We couple that to an IoT network. That makes it really easy for us to deploy sensors, especially in environments like the ones that you were describing, like oxygenless, filled to the brim with apples, not really hospitable for human or any kind of life. And then we add a whole layer of data analysis on top of that, because at the end of the day, just getting a signal of what a fruit is telling you is sometimes very difficult to interpret. And ethylene by itself is not really something that a customer can use to make a decision. So then we have to go ahead and interpret all of that data into a decision that the customer can make and save money with at the end of the day.
And it's interesting because I several years ago, a previous career, I had my feet in the ag biotech world, and I sort of remember the strawberry world a little bit. That this is another really tough fruit. It gets fungal infections pretty bad. There's some great strawberries that go in the supermarket for strawberries, and the stuff that doesn't make it, okay, that becomes jams and strawberry extracts or whatever you can do with that. When you're, and I see, if you could talk about any of your clients, that's fine. If it's all confidential at this point, to go into that. But when a signal comes into Strella that, hey, these 5 million apples, they're wherever they may be, it's going to happen soon. You got to do something with it. They're not going to make the supermarket. Maybe we can make cider out of them, or applesauce, or something else. What's the process there? Do you get like an email? Whoa, this warehouse, I got to call so and so, and then obviously we're sort of a very integrated world nowadays. Not all of our stuff does come from Lancaster, but apples come from China and grapes come from Chile. And talk a little bit about sort of the bigger picture here of how all this works together.
Totally. So I'll walk you through kind of our primary market right now, cool. Which is in apple and pear packing. Okay. So apples and pears are unique in that they can be stored for a long period of time. So an apple in a grocery store can be over a year old, actually. And it's not any voodoo or anything like that. Generally speaking, it's just kept in these, just generally kept in really weird, really space conditions, if you will. So like no oxygen, really cold temperature, like really controlled environments. And so if you can keep fruit in these perfect environments, then they can be stored for a year. So a typical packer that we work with has about 100 storage rooms. Each one is filled with about 5 million pieces of fruit. And the value of these rooms is huge too. It's like between $1 and $5 million. So the packer has to make a determination about which one of these 100 rooms contains the ripest produce. And they generally do this with historical data. So they know they've worked, for decades in this industry. They know Farmer Joe has got the really good Granny Smith apples. I can rely on those. But there's a lot of other factors that are just impossible to account for, like maybe a California wildfire brought in a bunch of smoke over the orchards, and all of a sudden the Gala apples fell off the trees way faster. And so now we have to do something about it. So what we do is we put sensors inside these storage rooms. We monitor them as they ripen, and we can tell a packer about 2 months in advance of the room going bad that it's going to do so. And that time frame is really critical because 2 months gives a packer enough time to try to make a decision about what they need to do. So sometimes the market can't bear 5 million Gala apples. No one's buying them at the time. So maybe we can make a decision with the customer about, okay, it's really the trouble is in this 25% of this room, or maybe that whole room just needs to get immediately sent out and taken care of. But either way, we make sure that we give our customers enough time to actually do something about it, because the whole point is that we're proactive and not reactive.
Mm-hmm. What has been obviously, you've Strella has done very well, sort of in your angel phase. Went into seed funding, some very prominent investors. What was the obviously ag? Once again, putting my memory cap on here. Ag biotech in the past was a tough sell, but it seems like you've done a pretty good job here. You have some sort of non-traditional investors. When you say, look at Yamaha, Marc Cuban, well, he's involved in a lot of stuff. Talk a little bit about, what it was like out on the road in raising money for the company. And then also, I'm very happy. I was happy to see Biotech Enterprises innovation of this nature in my home city of Philadelphia. You're a couple miles in that direction right now. Talk about the Philly biotech ecosystem. Hopefully, you can hang around and build Strella up here. Fingers crossed. Talk a little bit about how that's been in terms of growing a young biotech company like you've been doing.
Totally. And I'll start with the Philly piece because I'm pretty passionate about that too. So obviously I went to school at Penn and then afterwards graduated and started the company here. And I'm actually sitting right now in Pennovation Works, which is kind of a space for startups to grow and build. And we actually started, when we first started Strella, I couldn't even afford the space in Pennovation Works, and so I kind of squatted in a back building that one of the landlords very kindly pointed in my direction and wink wink nudge nudge, no one goes there, and wasn't really paying much rent, and had that leaky roof above my head, and I remember even a kindly custodian realized that there was someone occupying that space and there was no heat or air conditioning. And so he brought a little space heater for me. So that's kind of where Strella started. And now we've graduated to kind of the main building of Pennovation. And actually we're moving again to a larger building right across the street at Pennovation Works for slightly larger companies at this point. So excellent. I think Philly provides such a fantastic ecosystem for growing companies because it's not super expensive. You can start and get a really tiny little office space and start building and growing basically immediately. There's a good combination of talent and scrappiness here. You've got a ton of people who can do stuff, are willing to get their hands dirty, and are really doers. I think Philly is a big community of doers. So it's a great place to hire people for a growing company. I just think almost kind of got a blue collar attitude, which I think is super applicable to building a startup because at the end of the day, a lot of the early foundations are kind of just climbing up that mountain, and gritting through it a little bit. I think Philly's totally got that mentality. Also having all these different universities around is really helpful. We've got a bunch of young, talented people coming fresh out of school, excited to innovate and do something, as well as resources like professors who can sit and hear your ideas and tell you how dumb that is from decades of experience, and as well as obviously having financial resources that universities can provide to get that first bit of funding in.
Sure. And the road showing in terms of what it was like out there raising this institutional round?
Yeah, actually, the majority of our investors are on the California end of things, and you're totally right. Ag tech is kind of not a super traditional VC landscape. If you think about a Sand Hill Road investor, you think SaaS businesses, fintech, but I think everyone has kind of opened their eyes up to the fact that food waste is not only a huge problem, it's also a market, and a very potentially lucrative market. And not only that, it has a double bottom line, right? If you reduce food waste, you're saving people money, you're saving farmers, growers, packers, retailers, suppliers, real money. So it makes a ton of business sense, but you're also actually doing something good for the environment. And I think that's something that a lot of people can really get behind.
And once again, nothing confidential. Obviously, you're spending a lot of time focused on ethylene and ripening. I do remember from back in the day that another really tough area in that chain between the farm and the store was a post-harvest infection, where all sorts of other bugs that you don't think about in the field start eating away at stuff. Any other interesting components of this value chain that you're obviously focus on ethylene now, but things that keep you up at night, think, wow, we could go after that in a couple of years, or something else along this value chain of events?
Totally. So you're asking me for our secrets? No, I'm joking.
No,
I'm totally joking.
Don't go there. Don't have to.
No, I think what's been really like inspiring me a lot lately has been thinking about how to connect different players in the supply chain. So like, for example, the grower, the fruit is their baby. They know so much about it. They've kind of been with it from day one. They have a lot of information about it. The further down you go, the less information you have. So like by the time you get to Walmart, Walmart's kind of getting random apples. They know roughly where they came from. They know roughly when they were picked, maybe, but just really don't have too much data about this stuff. And a lot of the players in the supply chain are kind of siloed and like very focused on their day-to-day job and life, which makes a lot of sense because it's super hard. But I'm really interested in seeing what would happen if we were able to interconnect all these different players with data, and see how we can build and layer better business decisions on top of all of that information that's flowing from farm to fork, if you will.
Very cool. Katherine, obviously, you've been over at Penn. You've had great professors along the way. You have some partners in this that have been with you. Take a little time just to mention influencers, mentors, somebody in the molecular biology department, someone at the Wharton School, everyone that sort of helped you out and kept you motivated on this path. That wasn't, hey, this wasn't a dumb idea. This is a really good idea to start a business. Take some time to shout out to whoever you want.
Yeah, totally. So, well, I think the first one is obviously the Wharton undergraduate entrepreneurship department. So Valentina Gutorova and Jill Anik are kind of the leaders of the entrepreneurship scene at Penn. They do such a fantastic job with compiling resources and people and everything you could possibly need, and kind of creating that fostering environment for student entrepreneurs. And they've always had their doors open and listened to all those pitches and early things. Professor Jeffrey Babin, who teaches entrepreneurship, does an engineering entrepreneurship minor at Penn. Also fantastic person, along with Thomas Castle, who also teaches engineering entrepreneurship at Penn, were kind of the first people I ever really spoke to and heard about business from ever in my life. And I still keep in touch with them, and they're still cheerleading me on, which is always super great. I've been through a number of people at the biology department. So just in general, thanks to the whole bio department for helping me out and listening to me talk, probably in a very non-educated way about plant biology, and willing to listen. Trying to think who else. Yeah, there's just been so many people. Honestly, like starting a business, it takes a whole village for sure.
That it does, but you're doing a really good job of it, so it's very impressive. Final question, Katherine. While you're solving, this major food loss issue and saving the environment and the fresh water and everything, are you getting any fencing time in?
I'm really not. I haven't picked up an épée, which is my weapon style, since I graduated, which is a little bit sad. Although I think, honestly, after doing 4 years of, NCAA sports, I needed a break. So I've just been hitting the gym, sticking with that, but I'll get back to it, I promise.
Very cool. Very cool. Well, Katherine, once again, this is, it's fascinating listening to this story and watching it grow. I said, being in Philly, I've enjoyed reading about you along the way. So it's really exciting. For everybody that's going to be listening to this particular episode on the podcast or watching on the YouTube channel, you've been listening to Katherine Sizov, founder of Strella Biotechnology, doing really fascinating things with biosensing, Internet of Things, and once again, trying to save $1 trillion annually from all this food that we waste. Katherine, it's been a really fun time talking to you, really wishing you the best with all of this. I want to thank you for taking the time to come on the show. Thank you for doing what you're doing. And as we say on our show, thank you for helping to create a better tomorrow through what you're doing. It was a really great time talking to you.
Thank you. It was a pleasure.